Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, and in days of yore, and in times and tides long gone before, there dwelt in a certain town of Persia 2 brothers, one named Qasim and the other Alibaba, who at their father's demise had divided the little wealth he had left to them with equitable division, and had lost no time in wasting and spending it all. The elder, however, presently took to himself a wife, the daughter of an opulent merchant, so that when his father-in-law fared to the mercy of Almighty Allah, he became owner of a large shop filled with rare goods and costly wares, and of a storehouse stocked with precious stuffs, likewise of much gold that was buried in the ground. Thus was he known throughout the city as a substantial man. But the woman whom Alibaba had married was poor, and needy they lived, therefore, in a mean hovel, and Alibaba eked out a scanty livelihood by the sale of fuel which he daily collected in the jungle, and carried about the town to the bazaar upon his 3 asses. Now it chanced one day that Alibaba had cut dead branches and dry fuel sufficient for his need, and had placed the load upon his beasts, when suddenly he espied a dust cloud spiring high in air to his right, and moving rapidly towards him. And when he closely considered it, he descried a troop of horsemen riding on a mane, and about to reach him. At this sight he was sore alarmed, and fearing lest perchance they were a band of bandits who would slay him and drive off his donkeys, in his affright he began to run, but forasmuch as they were near hand, and he could not escape from out the forest. He drove his animals laden with the fuel into a byway of the bushes, and swarmed up a thick trunk of a huge tree to hide himself therein, and he sat upon a branch whence he could descry everything beneath him, whilst none below could catch a glimpse of him above. And that tree grew close beside a rock which towered high above head. The horsemen, young, active, and doughty riders, came close up to the rock face, and all dismounted, whereat Alibaba took good note of them, and soon he was fully persuaded by their mien and demeanor that they were a troop of highwaymen who, having fallen upon a caravan, had despoiled it, and carried off the spoil, and brought their booty to this place with intent of concealing it safely in some cache. Moreover, he observed that they were 40 in number. Alibaba saw the robbers, as soon as they came under the tree, each unbridle his horse and hobble it, then all took off their saddlebags, which proved to be full of gold and silver. The man who seemed to be the captain presently pushed forwards, load on shoulder, through thorns and thickets, till he came up to a certain spot where he uttered these strange words, "Open, O Simsim I," and forthwith appeared a wide doorway in the face of the rock. The robbers went in, and last of all their chief, and then the portal shut of itself. Long while they stayed within the cave, whilst Alibaba was constrained to abide perched upon the tree, reflecting that if he came down peradventure the band might issue forth that very moment and seize him and slay him. At last he had determined to mount one of the horses, and driving on his asses to return townwards, when suddenly the portal flew open. The robber chief was first to issue forth. Then, standing at the entrance, he saw and counted his men as they came out, and lastly he spake the magical words, "Shut, O Simsim," whereat the door closed of itself. When all had passed muster and review, each slung on his saddlebags and bridled his own horse, and as soon as ready they rode off, led by the leader, in the direction whence they came. Alibaba remained still perched on the tree, and watched their departure, nor would he descend, until what time they were clean gone out of sight, lest perchance one of them return and look around and descry him. Then he thought within himself, "I too will try the virtue of those magical words, and see if at my bidding the door will open and close." So he called out aloud, "Open, O Simsim," and no sooner had he spoken than straightway the portal flew open, and he entered within. He saw a large cavern and a vaulted, in height equaling the stature of a full-grown man, and it was hewn in the live stone and lighted up with light that came through air holes and bullseyes in the upper surface of the rock which formed the roof. He had expected to find naught save outer gloom in this robber's den, and he was surprised to see the whole room filled with bales of all manner stuffs, and heaped up from sole to ceiling with camel-loads of silks, and brocades and embroidered cloths, and mounds on mounds on mounds of vari-colored carpetings. Besides which he espied coins golden and silvern without measure or account, some piled upon the ground and others bound in leathern bags and sacks. Seeing these goods and monies in such abundance, Alibaba determined in his mind that not during a few years only but for many generations thieves must have stored their gains and spoils in this place. When he stood within the cave, its door had closed upon him, yet he was not dismayed, since he had kept in memory the magical words, and he took no heed of the precious stuffs around him, but applied himself only and wholly to the sacks of ashrafis. He carried out as many as he judged sufficient burthen for the beasts. Then he loaded them upon his animals and covered this plunder with sticks and fuel, so none might discern the bags, but might think that he was carrying home his usual ware. Lastly he called out, "Shut, O Simsim," and forthwith the door closed, for the spell so wrought that whensoever any entered the cave, its portal shut of itself behind him, and as he issued therefrom, the same would neither open nor close again till he had pronounced the words, "Shut, O Simsim." Presently, having laden his asses, Alibaba urged them before him with all speed to the city, and reaching home he drove them into the yard, and shutting close the outer door, took down first the sticks and fuel, and after the bags of gold which he carried in to his wife. She felt them, and finding them full of coin, suspected that Alibaba had been robbing, and fell to berating and blaming him for that he should do so ill a thing. Then quoth Alibaba to his wife, "Indeed, I am no robber, but rather do thou rejoice with me at our good fortune." Hereupon he told her of his adventure, and began to pour the gold from the bags in heaps before her, and her sight was dazzled by the sheen, and her heart delighted at his recital and adventures. Then she began counting the gold, whereat quoth Alibaba, "O silly woman, how long wilt thou continue turning over the coin? Now let me dig a hole wherein to hide this treasure, that none may know its secret." Quoth she, "Right is thy rede. Still would I weigh the monies and have some inkling of their amount." And he replied, "As thou pleasest, but see thou tell no man." So she went off in haste to Qasim's home to borrow weights and scales wherewith she might balance the ashrafis and make some reckoning of their value, and when she could not find Qasim, she said to his wife, "Lend me, I pray thee, thy scales for a moment." Replied her sister-in-law, "Hast thou need of the bigger balance or the smaller?" And the other rejoined, "I need not the large scales, give me the little." And her sister-in-law cried, "Stay here a moment whilst I look about and find thy want." With this pretext Qasim's wife went aside and secretly smeared wax and suet over the pan of the balance, that she might know what thing it was Alibaba's wife would weigh, for she made sure that whatso it be some bit thereof would stick to the wax and fat. So the woman took this opportunity to satisfy her curiosity, and Alibaba's wife, suspecting naught thereof, carried home the scales and began to weigh the gold, whilst Alibaba ceased not digging, and, when the money was weighed, they twain stowed it into the hole, which they carefully filled up with earth. Then the good wife took back the scales to her kinswoman, all unknowing that an ashrafi had adhered to the cup of the scales. But when Qasim's wife espied the gold coin, she fumed with envy and wrath, saying to herself, "So ho! They borrowed my balance to weigh at ashrafis." And she marveled greatly whence so poor a man as Alibaba had gotten such store of wealth, that he should be obliged to weigh it with a pair of scales. Now, after long pondering the matter, when her husband returned home at eventide, she said to him, "O man, thou deemest thyself a wight of wealth and substance, but lo! Thy brother Alibaba is an emir by the side of thee, and richer far than thou art. He hath such heaps of gold that he must needs weigh his monies with scales, whilst thou, forsooth, art satisfied to count thy coin. Whence knowest thou this?" asked Qasim, and in answer his wife related all anent the pair of scales, and how she found an ashrafi stuck to them, and shewed him the gold coin which bore the mark and superscription of some ancient king. No sleep had Qasim all that night by reason of his envy and jealousy and covetous, and next morning he rose betimes, and going to Alibaba said, "O my brother, to all appearance thou art poor and needy, but in effect thou hast a store of wealth so abundant that perforce thou must weigh thy gold with scales." Quoth Alibaba, "What is this thou sayest? I understand thee not, make clear thy purport." And quoth Qasim with ready rage, "Feign not that thou art ignorant of what I say, and think not to deceive me." Then showing him the ashrafi, he cried, "Thousands of gold coins such as these thou hast put by, and meanwhile my wife found this one stuck to the cup of the scales." Then Alibaba understood how both Qasim and his wife knew that he had store of ashrafas, and said in his mind that it would not avail him to keep the matter hidden, but would rather cause ill will and mischief. And thus he was induced to tell his brother every whit concerning the bandits, and also of the treasure trove in the cave. When he had heard the story, Qasim exclaimed, "I would fain learn of thee the certainty of the place where them foundest the monies, also the magical words, whereby the door opened and closed, and I forewarn thee, and thou tell me not the whole truth. I will give notice of those ashrafas to the wali. Then shalt thou forfeit all thy wealth and be disgraced and thrown into gaol." Thereupon Ali Baba told him his tale, not forgetting the magical words, and Qasim, who kept careful heed of all these matters, next day set out, driving 10 mules he had hired, and readily found the place which Ali Baba had described to him. And when he came to the aforesaid rock, and to the tree whereon Ali Baba had hidden himself, and he had made sure of the door, he cried in great joy, "Open, O Simsim." The portal yawned wide at once, and Qasim went within, and saw the piles of jewels and treasures lying ranged all around. And as soon as he stood amongst them, the door shut after him as wont to do. He walked about in ecstasy, marveling at the treasures, and when weary of admiration, he gathered together bags of ashrafis, a sufficient load for his 10 mules, and placed them by the entrance in readiness to be carried outside and set upon the beasts. But by the will of Allah Almighty, he had clean forgotten the Kabbalistic words, and cried out, "Open, O barley," whereat the door refused to move. Astonished and confused beyond measure, he named the names of all manner of grain save sesame, which had slipped from his memory, as though he had never heard the word, whereat in his dire distress he heeded not the ashrafis that lay heaped at the entrance and paced to and fro, backwards and forwards, within the cave, sorely puzzled and perplexed. The wealth whose sight had awhile filled his heart with joy and gladness was now the cause of bitter grief and sadness. Qasim gave up all hope of the life which he by his greed and envy had so sore imperiled. It came to pass that at noontide the robbers, returning by that way, saw from afar some mules standing beside the entrance, and much they marveled at what had brought the beasts to that place for, inasmuch as Qasim by mischance had failed to tether or hobble them. They had strayed about the jungle and were browsing hither and thither. However, the thieves paid scant regard to the estrays, nor cared they to secure them, but only wondered by what means they had wandered so far from the town. Then, reaching the cave, the captain and his troop dismounted, and going up to the door repeated the formula, and at once it flew open. Now Qasim had heard from within the cave the horse hooves drawing nigh and yet nigher, and he fell down to the ground in a fit of fear, never doubting that it was the clatter of the banditti, who would slaughter him without fail. Howbeit he presently took heart of grace, and at the moment when the door flew open he rushed out, hoping to make good his escape. But the unhappy ran full tilt against the captain, who stood in front of the band, and felled him to the ground, whereupon a robber standing near his chief at once bared his brand, and with one cut clave Qasim clean in twain. Thereupon the robbers rushed into the cavern, and put back as they were before the bags of ashrafis, which Qasim had heaped up at the doorway ready for taking away, nor recked they aught of those which Ali Baba had removed. So dazed and amazed were they to discover by what means the strange man had effected an entrance. All knew that it was not possible for any to drop through the skylight, so tall and steep was the rock's face, withal slippery of ascent, and also that none could enter by the portal unless he knew the magical words whereby to open it. However, they presently quartered the dead body of Qasim and hung it to the door within the cavern, 2 parts to the right jam, and as many to the left, that the sight might be a warning of approaching doom for all who dared enter the cave. Then coming out, they closed the hoard door, and rode away upon their wonted work. Now when night fell and Qasim came not home, his wife waxed uneasy in mind, and running round to Ali Baba said, "O my brother, Qasim hath not returned, thou knowest whither he went, and sore I fear me some misfortune hath betided him." Ali Baba also divined that a mishap had happened to prevent his return. Not the less, however, he strove to comfort his sister-in-law with words of cheer, and said, "O wife of my brother, Qasim haply exercised the discretion, and, avoiding the city, cometh by a roundabout road, and will be here anon. This, I do believe, is the reason why he tarrieth. Thereupon, comforted in spirit, Kasim's wife fared homewards, and sat awaiting her husband's return. But when half the night was spent, and still he came not, she was as one distraught. She feared to cry aloud for her grief, lest haply the neighbors hearing her should come and learn the secret. So she wept in silence, and upbraiding herself fell to thinking, wherefore did I disclose this secret to him, and beget envy and jealousy of Alibaba? This be the fruit thereof, and hence the disaster that hath come down upon me. She spent the rest of the night in bitter tears, and early on the morrow hied in hottest hurry to Alibaba, and prayed that he would go forth in quest of his brother. So he strove to console her, and straightway set out with his asses for the forest. Presently, reaching the rock, he wondered to see stains of blood freshly shed, and not finding his brother or the 10 mules, he forefelt a calamity from so evil a sign. He then went to the door, and saving open O Simsim, he pushed in and saw the dead body of Kasim, 2 parts hanging to the right, and the rest to the left of the entrance. Albeit he was affrighted beyond measure of affright, he wrapped the quarters in 2 cloths, and laid them upon one of his asses, hiding them carefully with sticks and fuel that none might see them. Then he placed the bags of gold upon the 2 other animals, and likewise covered them most carefully, and when all was made ready, he closed the cave door with the magical words, and set him forth wending homewards with all ward and watchfulness. The asses with the load of ashrafis he made over to his wife, and bade her bury the bags with diligence, but he told her not the condition in which he had come upon his brother Kasim. Then he went with the other ass, to wit, the beast whereon was laid the corpse, to the widow's house, and knocked gently at the door. Now Kasim had a slave girl shrewd and sharp-witted, Morgiana hight. She as softly undid the bolt, and admitted Ali Baba and the ass into the courtyard of the house, when he let down the body from the beast's back, and said, O Morgiana, haste thee, and make thee ready to perform the rites for the burial of thy lord. I now go to tell the tidings to thy mistress, and I will quickly return to help thee in this matter. At that instant Kasim's widow, seeing her brother-in-law, exclaimed, O Ali Baba, what news bringest thou of my spouse? Alas, I see grief tokens written upon thy countenance. Say quickly what hath happened. Then he recounted to her how it had fared with her husband, and how he had been slain by the robbers, and in what wise he had brought home the dead body. Ali Baba pursued, O my lady, what was to happen hath happened, but it behoveth us to keep this matter secret, for that our lives depend upon privacy. She wept with sore weeping, and made answer, It hath fared with my husband according to the fiat of Fate, and now for thy safety's sake I give thee my word to keep the affair concealed. He replied, Naught can avail when Allah hath decreed. Rest thee in patience until the days of thy widowhood be accomplished, after which time I will take thee to wife, and thou shalt live in comfort and happiness, and fear not lest my first spouse vex thee, or show aught of jealousy, for that she is kindly and tender of heart. The widow, lamenting her loss noisily, cried, Be it as e'en thou please. Then Ali Baba farewelled her, weeping and wailing for her husband, and joining Morgiana took counsel with her how to manage the burial of his brother. So after much consultation and many warnings, he left the slave girl and departed home, driving his ass before him. As soon as Ali Baba had fared forth, Morgiana went quickly to a druggist's shop, and that she might the better dissemble with him, and not make known the matter, she asked of him a drug often administered to men when diseased with dangerous distemper. He gave it, saying, Who is there in thy house that lieth so ill as to require this medicine? And said she, My master Kasim is sick well nigh unto death. For many days he hath nor spoken nor tasted aught of food, so that almost we despair of his life. Next day Morgiana went again, and asked the druggist for more of medicine and essences such as are inhibited to the sick when at door of death, that the moribund may haply rally before the last breath. The man gave the potion, and she, taking it, sighed aloud and wept, saying, I fear me he may not have strength to drink this draught. Methinks all will be over with him ere I return to the house. Meanwhile, Alibaba was anxiously awaiting to hear sounds of wailing and lamentation in Qasim's home, that he might at such signal hasten thither and take part in the ceremonies of the funeral. Early on the second day, Morgiana went with veiled face to one Baba Mustafa, a tailor well shotten in years, whose craft was to make shrouds and cerecloths, and as soon as she saw him open his shop, she gave him a gold piece and said, "Do thou bind a bandage over thine eyes and come along with me." Mustafa made as though he would not go, whereat Morgiana placed a second gold coin in his palm and entreated him to accompany her. The tailor presently consented for greed of gain, so tying a kerchief tightly over his eyes, she led him by the hand to the house wherein lay the dead body of her master. Then, taking off the bandage in the darkened room, she bade him sew together the quarters of the corpse, limb to its limb, and, casting a cloth upon the body, said to the tailor, "Make haste and sew a shroud according to the size of this dead man, and I will give thee therefore yet another ducat." Baba Mustafa quickly made the cere cloth of fitting length and breadth, and Morgiana paid him the promised ashrafai. Then, once more bandaging his eyes, led him back to the place whence she had brought him. After this she returned hurriedly home, and with the help of Alibaba washed the body in warm water, and donning the shroud, lay the corpse upon a clean place ready for burial. This done, Morgiana went to the mosque and gave notice to an imam that a funeral was awaiting the mourners in a certain household, and prayed that he would come to read the prayers for the dead, and the imam went back with her. Then 4 neighbors took up the bier and bore it on to near shoulders, and fared forth with the imam and others who were wont to give assistance at such obsequies. After the funeral prayers were ended, 4 other men carried off the coffin, and Morgiana walked before it bare of head, striking her breast and weeping and wailing with exceeding loud lament, whilst Alibaba and the neighbors came behind. In such order they entered the cemetery and buried him. Then, leaving him to Munkar and Nakir, the questioners of the dead, all wended their ways. Presently the women of the quarter, according to the custom of the city, gathered together in the house of mourning, and sat an hour with Qasim's widow, comforting and condoling, presently leaving her somewhat resigned and cheered. Alibaba stayed 40 days at home in ceremonial lamentation for the loss of his brother, so none within the town, save himself and his wife Qasim's widow, and Morgiana, knew aught about the secret. And when the 40 days of mourning were ended, Alibaba removed to his own quarters all the property belonging to the deceased, and openly married the widow. Then he appointed his nephew, his brother's eldest son, who had lived a long time with a wealthy merchant, and was perfect of knowledge in all matters of trade, such as selling and buying, to take charge of the defunct's shop and to carry on the business. It so chanced one day, when the robbers, as was their wont, came to the treasure cave, that they marveled exceedingly to find nor sign nor trace of Qasim's body, whilst they observed that much of gold had been carried off. Quoth the captain, "Now it behoveth us to make inquiry in this matter, else shall we suffer much of loss ere this our treasure, which we and our forefathers have amassed during the course of many years, will little by little be wasted and spoiled." Hereto all assented, and with single mind agreed that he whom they had slain had knowledge of the magical words, whereby the door was made to open. Moreover, that some one beside him had cognizance of the spell, and had carried off the body, and also much of gold. Wherefore they needs must make diligent research, and find out who the man ever might be. They then took counsel and determined that one amongst them, who should be sagacious and deft of wit, must don the dress of some merchant from foreign parts. Then, repairing to the city, he must go about from quarter to quarter and from street to street, and learn if any townsman had lately died, and if so, where he wont to dwell, that with this clue they might be enabled to find the wight they sought. "Hearye," it said one of the robbers, "grant me leave that I fare and find out such tidings in the town, and bring thee word anon, and if I fail of my purpose, I hold my life in forfeit." Accordingly that bandit, after disguising himself by dress, pushed at night into the town, and next morning early he repaired to the market square, and saw that none of the shops had yet been opened, save only that of Baba Mustafa the tailor, who thread and needle in hand sat upon his working stool. The thief bade him good day and said, "'Tis yet dark, how canst thou see to sew?" Said the tailor, "I perceive thou art a stranger." Despite my years, my eyesight is so keen that only yesterday I sewed together a dead body while sitting in a room quite darkened," quoth the bandit thereupon to himself. "I shall get somewhat of my want from this snip, and to secure a further clue," he asked, "meseemeth thou wouldst jest with me, and thou meanest that a cerecloth for a corpse was stitched by thee, and that thy business is to sew shrouds." Answered the tailor, "It mattereth not to thee, question me no more questions." Thereupon the robber placed an ashrafi in his hand and continued, "I desire not to discover aught thou hidest, albeit my breast, like every honest man's, is the grave of secrets, and this only would I learn of thee. In what house didst thou do that job? Canst thou direct me thither, or thyself conduct me thereto?" The tailor took the gold with greed and cried, "I have not seen with my own eyes the way to that house. A certain bondswoman led me to a place which I know right well, and there she bandaged my eyes and guided me to some tenement, and lastly carried me into a darkened room, where lay the dead body dismembered. Then she unbound the kerchief and bade me sew together first the corpse and then the shroud, which having done she again blindfolded me and led me back to the stead whence she had brought me and left me there. Thou seest then I am not able to tell thee where thou shalt find the house." Quoth the robber, "Albeit thou knowest not the dwelling whereof thou speakest, still canst thou take me to the place where thou wast blindfolded, then I will bind a kerchief over thine eyes and lead thee as thou wast led. On this wise perchance thou mayest hit upon the sight. And thou wilt do this favor by me. See, here another golden ducat is thine." Thereupon the bandit slipped a second ashrafi into the tailor's palm, and Baba Mustafa thrust it with the first into his pocket. Then, leaving his shop as it was, he walked to the place where Morgiana had tied the kerchief around his eyes, and with him went the robber who, after binding on the bandage, led him by the hand. Baba Mustafa, who was clever and keen-witted, presently striking the street whereby he had fared with the handmaid, walked on counting step by step, then, halting suddenly, he said, "Thus far I came with her," and the twain stopped in front of Qasim's house wherein now dwelt his brother Alibaba. The robber then made marks with white chalk upon the door to the end that he might readily find it at some future time, and removing the bandage from the tailor's eyes said, "O Baba Mustafa, I thank thee for this favor, and Almighty Allah guerdon thee for thy goodness. Tell me now, I pray thee, and dwelleth in yonder house?" Quoth he, "In very sooth I wot not, for I have little knowledge concerning this quarter of the city." And the bandit, understanding that he could find no further clue from the tailor, dismissed him to his shop with abundant thanks, and hastened back to the tryst place in the jungle where the band awaited his coming. Not long after it so fortuned that Morgiana, going out upon some errand, marveled exceedingly at seeing the chalk mark showing white in the door. She stood a while deep in thought, and presently divined that some enemy had made the signs that he might recognize the house and play some slight upon her lord. She therefore chalked the doors of all her neighbors in like manner, and kept the matter secret, never entrusting it or to master or to mistress. Meanwhile the robber told his comrades his tale of adventure, and how he had found the clue. So the captain, and with him all the band, went one after other by different ways till they entered the city, and he who had placed the mark on Alibaba's door accompanied the chief to point out the place. He conducted him straightway to the house, and shewing the sign exclaimed, "Here dwelleth he of whom we are in search." But when the captain looked around him, he saw that all the dwellings bore chalk marks after like fashion, and he wondered, saying, "By what manner of means knowest thou which house of all these houses that bear similar signs is that whereof thou spakest?" Hereat the robber guide was confounded beyond measure of confusion, and could make no answer. Then with an oath he cried, "I did assuredly set a sign upon a door, but I know not whence came all the marks upon the other entrances, nor can I say for a surety which it was I chalked." Thereupon the captain returned to the marketplace and said to his men, "We have toiled and labored in vain, nor have we found the house we went forth to seek. Return we now to the forest, our rendezvous also will fare thither." Then all trooped off, and assembled together within the treasure cave, and, when the robbers had all met, The captain judged him worthy of punishment, who had spoken falsely and had led them through the city to no purpose. So he imprisoned him in presence of them all, and then said he, "To him amongst you will I show special favor who shall go to town and bring me intelligence whereby we may lay hands upon the plunderer of our property." Hereat another of the company came forward and said, "I am ready to go and inquire into the case, and 'tis I who will bring thee to thy wish." The captain, after giving him presents and promises, dispatched him upon his errand, and by the decree of destiny which none may gainsay, this second robber went first to the house of Baba Mustafa the tailor, as had done the thief who had foregone him. In like manner, he also persuaded the snip with gifts of gold and coin that he be led hoodwinked, and thus too he was guided to Ali Baba's door. Here, noting the work of his predecessor, he affixed to the jam a mark with red chalk, the better to distinguish it from the others, whereon still showed the white. Then hied he back in stealth to his company, but Morgiana on her part also descried the red sign on the entrance, and with subtle forethought marked all the others after the same fashion, nor told she any what she had done. Meanwhile the bandit rejoined his band and vauntingly said, "O our captain, I have found the house and thereon put a mark, whereby I shall distinguish it clearly from all its neighbors." The captain dispatched another of his men to the city, and he found the place, but, as aforetime, when the troop repaired thither they saw each and every house marked with signs of red chalk. So they returned disappointed, and the captain, waxing displeased exceedingly and distraught, clapped also this spy into gaol. Then said the chief to himself, "Two men have failed in their endeavor and have met their rightful meed of punishment, and I trow that none other of my band will essay to follow up their research, so I myself will go and find the house of this white." Accordingly he fared along, and aided by the tailor Baba Mustafa, who had gained much gain of golden pieces in this matter, he hit upon the house of Ali Baba, and here he made no outward show or sign, but marked it on the tablet of his heart, and impressed the picture upon the page of his memory. Then returning to the jungle he said to his men, "I have full cognizance of the place, and have limned it clearly in my mind. So now there will be no difficulty in finding it. Go forth straightways and buy me, and bring hither 19 mules together with one large leathern jar of mustard oil and 37 vessels of the same kind clean empty. Without me, and the two locked up in gaol ye number 37 souls, so I will stow you away armed and accoutred each within his jar, and will load 2 upon each mule, and upon the 19th mule there shall be a man in an empty jar on one side, and on the other the jar full of oil. I for my part, in guise of an oil merchant, will drive the mules into the town, arriving at the house by night, and will ask permission of its master to tarry there until morning. After this we shall seek occasion during the dark hours to rise up and fall upon him and slay him." Furthermore the captain spake, saying, "When we have made an end of trim we shall recover the gold and treasure whereof he robbed us, and bring it back upon the mules." This counsel pleased the robbers, who went forthwith and purchased mules and huge leathern jars, and did as the captain had bidden them. And after a delay of 3 days, shortly before nightfall they arose, and oversmearing all the jars with oil of mustard, each hid him inside an empty vessel. The chief then disguised himself in trader's gear and placed the jars upon the 19 mules, to wit, the 37 vessels, in each of which lay a robber armed and accoutred, and the one that was full of oil. This done, he drove the beasts before him, and presently he reached Ali Baba's place at nightfall, when it chanced that the house master was strolling after supper to and fro in front of his home. The captain saluted him with the salam and said, "I come from such and such a village with oil, and ofttimes have I been here selling oil. But now to my grief I have arrived too late, and I am sore troubled and perplexed as to where I shall spend the night. And thou have pity on me, I pray thee grant, that I tarry here in thy courtyard, and ease the mules by taking down the jars and giving the beasts somewhat of fodder." Albeit Ali Baba had heard the captain's voice when perched upon the tree, and had seen him enter the cave, yet by reason of the disguise he knew him not for the leader of the thieves, and granted his request with hearty welcome, and gave him full license to halt there for the night. He then pointed out an empty shed wherein to tether the mules, and bade one of the slave boys go fetch grain and water. He also gave orders to the slave girl Morgiana, saying, "A guest hath come hither and tarrieth here tonight. Do thou busy thyself with all speed about his supper, and make ready the guest bed for him." Presently, when the captain had let down all the jars and had fed and watered his mules, Alibaba received him with all courtesy and kindness, and summoning Morgiana said in his presence, "See thou fail not in service of this our stranger, nor suffer him to lack for aught. Tomorrow early I would fare to the hammam and bathe, so do thou give my slave boy Abdullah a suit of clean white clothes which I may put on after washing. Moreover, make thee ready a somewhat of broth overnight, that I may drink it after my return home," replied she. "I will have all in readiness, as thou hast bidden." So Ali Baba retired to his rest, and the captain, having supped, repaired to the shed and saw that all the mules had their food and drink for the night. The captain, after seeing to the mules and the jars which Ali Baba and his household held to be full of oil, finding utter privacy, whispered to his men who were in ambush, "This night at midnight, when you hear my voice, do you quickly open with your sharp knives the leathern jars from top to bottom and issue forth without delay." Then passing through the kitchen, he reached the chamber wherein a bed had been dispread for him, Morgiana showing the way with a lamp. Quoth she, "And now need aught beside, I pray thee command this thy slave, who is ever ready to obey thy say." He made answer, "Naught else need I then." Putting out the light, he lay him down on the bed to sleep a while ere the time came to rouse his men and finish off the work. Meanwhile Morgiana did as her master had bidden her. She first took out a suit of clean white clothes and made it over to Abdullah, who had not yet gone to rest. Then she placed the pipkin upon the hearth to boil the broth, and blew the fire till it burnt briskly. After a short delay she needs must see in the broth be boiling, but by that time all the lamps had gone out, and she found that the oil was spent, and that nowhere could she get a light. The slave boy Abdullah observed that she was troubled and perplexed hereat, and quoth he to her, "Why make so much ado? In yonder shed are many jars of oil, go now, and take as much soever as thou listest." Morgiana gave thanks to him for his suggestion, and Abdullah, who was lying at his ease in the hall, went off to sleep, so that he might wake betimes and serve Ali Baba in the bath. So the handmaiden rose, and with oil can in hand walked to the shed where stood the leathern jars all ranged in rows. Now, as she drew nigh unto one of the vessels, the thief who was hidden therein, hearing the tread of footsteps, bethought him that it was of his captain, whose summons he awaited, so he whispered, "Is it now time for us to sally forth?" Morgiana started back affrighted at the sound of human accents, but, inasmuch as she was bold and ready of wit, she replied, "The time is not yet come," and said to herself, "These jars are not full of oil, and herein I perceive a manner of mystery. Haply the oil merchant hatcheth some treacherous plot against my lord, so Allah, the compassionate, protect us from his snares." Wherefore she answered in a voice made like to the captain's, "Not yet. The time is not come." Then she went to the next jar and returned the same reply to him who was within, and so on to all the vessels one by one. Then said she in herself, "Laud to the Lord. My master took this fellow in believing him to be an oil merchant, but lo, he hath admitted a band of robbers, who only await the signal to fall upon him, and plunder the place and do him die." Then passed she on to the furthest jar, and finding it brimming with oil, filled her can, and returning to the kitchen, trimmed the lamp and lit the wicks. Then, bringing forth a large cauldron, she set it upon the fire, and filling it with oil from out the jar, heaped wood upon the hearth, and fanned it to a fierce flame, the readier to boil its contents. When this was done, she baled it out in potfuls, and poured it seething hot into the leathern vessels, one by one, while the thieves, unable to escape, were scalded to death, and every jar contained a corpse. Thus did this slave girl, by her subtle wit, make a clean end of all noiselessly, and unknown even to the dwellers, the house. Now, When she had satisfied herself that each and every of the men had been slain, she went back to the kitchen and, shutting to the door, sat brewing Alibaba's broth. Scarce had an hour passed before the captain woke from sleep, and opening wide his window, saw that all was dark and silent, so he clapped his hands as a signal for his men to come forth, but not a sound was heard in return. After a while he clapped again and called aloud but got no answer, and when he cried out a third time without reply, he was perplexed and went out to the shed wherein stood the jars. He thought to himself, "Perchance all are fallen asleep, whenas the time for action is now at hand, so I must e'en awaken them without stay or delay." Then approaching the nearest jar, he was startled by a smell of oil and seething flesh, and touching it outside he felt it reeking hot. Then going to the others one by one, he found all in like condition. Hereat he knew for a surety the fate which had betided his band, and, fearing for his own safety, he clomb onto the wall, and thence dropping into a garden made his escape in high dudgeon and sore disappointment. Morgiana awaited a while to see the captain return from the shed, but he came not, whereat she knew that he had scaled the wall and had taken to flight, for that the street door was double locked. And the thieves, being all disposed of on this wise, Morgiana laid her down to sleep in perfect solace and ease of mind. When 2 hours of darkness yet remained, Alibaba awoke and went to the hammam, knowing naught of the night adventure, for the gallant slave girl had not aroused him, nor indeed had she deemed such action expedient, because had she sought an opportunity of reporting to him her plan, she might haply have lost her chance and spoiled the project. The sun was high over the horizon when Alibaba walked back from the baths, and he marveled exceedingly to see the jars still standing under the shed, and said, "How cometh it that he, the oil merchant my guest, hath not carried to the market his mules and jars of oil?" Alibaba presently asked Morgiana what had befallen the oil merchant his guest, whom he had placed under her charge, and she answered, "Allah Almighty vouchsafe to thee 60 years and 10 of safety. I will tell thee in privacy of this merchant." So Alibaba went apart with his slave girl, who taking him without the house first locked the court door, then showing him a jar she said, "Pray thee look into this, and see if within there be oil or aught else." Thereupon peering inside it, he perceived a man, at which sight he cried aloud, and fain would have fled in his fright. Quoth Morgiana, "Fear him not. This man hath no longer the force to work thee harm, he lieth dead and stone dead." Hearing such words of comfort and reassurance, Alibaba asked, "O Morgiana, what evils have we escaped, and by what means hath this wretch become the quarry of fate?" She answered, "Alhamdulillah, praise be to Almighty Allah. I will inform thee fully of the case, but hush thee, speak not aloud, lest haply the neighbors learn the secret, and it end in our confusion. Look now into all the jars, one by one from first to last." So Alibaba examined them severally, and found in each a man fully armed and accoutred, and all lay scalded to death. Hereat, speechless for sheer amazement, he stared at the jars, but presently recovering himself, he asked, "And where is he, the oil merchant?" Answered she, "Of him also I will inform thee. The villain was no traitor, but a traitorous assassin, whose honeyed words would have ensnared thee to thy doom, and now I will tell thee what he was, and what hath happened but. Meanwhile thou art fresh from the hammam, and thou shouldst first drink somewhat of this broth for thy stomach's and thy health's sake." So Alibaba went within, and Morgiana served up the mess, after which quoth her master, "I fain would hear this wondrous story, prithee tell it to me, and set my heart at ease." Hereat the handmaid fell to relating whatso had betided in these words, "O my master, when thou badest me boil the broth and retiredst to rest, thy slave in obedience to thy command took out a suit of clean white clothes and gave it to the boy Abdullah, then kindled the fire and set on the broth. As soon as it was ready, I had need to light a lamp so that I might see to skim it, but all the oil was spent, and learning this I told my want to the slave boy Abdullah, who advised me to draw somewhat from the jars which stood under the shed. Accordingly, I took a can and went to the first vessel, when suddenly I heard a voice within whisper with all caution, "Is it now time for us to sally forth?" I was amazed thereat, and judged that the pretended merchant had laid some plot to slay thee, so I replied, "The time is not yet come." Then I went to the second jar and heard another voice, to which I made the like answer, and so on with all of them. I now was certified that these men awaited only some signal from their chief, whom thou didst take to guest within thy walls, supposing him to be a merchant in oil. and that after thou receivedst him hospitably, the miscreant had brought these men to murder thee, and to plunder thy good and spoil thy house. But I gave him no opportunity to win his wish, hoard of gold and silver untouched, and lying as he had left them. So he felt assured that not one of all the thieves remained alive, and that save himself there was not a soul who knew the secret of the place. At once he bound in his saddlecloth a load of ashrafis, such as his horse could bear, and brought it home, and in after days he showed the hoard to his sons and sons and sons, and taught them how the door could be caused to open and shut. Thus Alibaba and his household lived all their lives in wealth and joyance in that city where erst he had been a pauper, and by the blessing of that secret treasure he rose to high degree in dignities.